Imagine a time when an unmarked black sedan easing to the curb could mean the end of someone's life. When a quiet knock at a restaurant's back door wasn't an invitation to dinner, but a summons to disappear. From the 1920s through the late 20th century, America's great cities pulsed with that kind of danger. A parallel world ruled not by elected officials or police chiefs, but by men whose names became legends of fear. They weren't cartoon villains or back-alley pickpockets. They were CEOs of crime, shrewd businessmen with an instinct for blood. During Prohibition, while the country argued about morality and alcohol, these men built empires worth millions. They bought judges, bribed cops, and silenced anyone who even whispered dissent. One word from them could spark a street war. One gesture could seal a rival's fate. Picture Al Capone strolling the streets of Chicago in a tailored suit, smiling for photographers while his gunmen enforced his iron rule in smoky speakeasies and shadowed alleys. Think of Charles Lucky Luciano, the architect of the National Crime Syndicate, who turned disorganized gangs into a corporate network of gambling, narcotics, and extortion that spanned the entire country. Fast forward to John Gotti, the so-called Teflon Don, who walked in and out of courtrooms grinning while juries mysteriously refused to convict. These men weren't just gangsters, they were icons of power, wealth, and terror. But their stories are more than headlines of violence. They reveal how ambition, fear, and loyalty can twist into something far darker. Capone fed the poor of Chicago while ordering hits on anyone who crossed him. Luciano modernized organized crime even as he trafficked in human suffering. Gotti basked in the spotlight, making a mockery of the law until his own crew betrayed him. Each operated by a ruthless code, loyalty above all else, and silence, omerta, as the price of survival. Law enforcement fought back with everything from wiretaps to undercover agents, but every step forward seemed to spark a deadlier countermove. Entire neighborhoods became battlegrounds, unions, businesses, even city halls were caught in the crossfire. For decades, the FBI played a dangerous game of cat and mouse, slowly tightening the net, while these mobsters lived like kings. Why does this dark chapter still fascinate us? Because it forces us to look at power stripped of morality. These men embodied the American dream twisted into nightmare, immigrants and outsiders who seized opportunity, built fortunes, and ruled with absolute authority, only to discover that every empire built on fear eventually collapses. In the next chapters, we'll step deeper into their world. We'll walk the blood-slick streets of Chicago during Capone's reign, slip into the smoky back rooms where Luciano plotted a nationwide network, and stand outside the Manhattan courthouse where Gotti smiled as the cameras flashed. These are the ruthless mobsters who terrorized America, and their stories are as gripping and as cautionary as ever. The mob's grip on America tightened as Prohibition rolled into full swing. Speakeasies flourished under their protection, and entire truckloads of bootleg liquor crisscrossed the country while lawmen looked the other way, sometimes because they were paid to, other times because they feared what would happen if they didn't. In Chicago, Al Capone's outfit became a machine that printed money and spilled blood in equal measure. His men hijacked shipments, bribed politicians, and executed rivals with a precision that left the city in constant dread. Citizens whispered his name as if it carried a curse. Newspapers splashed his every move across front pages, transforming a ruthless killer into a dark celebrity. Meanwhile, on the East Coast, a younger generation of mobsters saw opportunity in organization. Charles Lucky Luciano understood that endless turf wars only drained profits. He envisioned a syndicate where the most powerful families cooperated like board members of a vast criminal corporation. Gambling, prostitution, narcotics, all became carefully managed enterprises. To the public, these men wore fine suits and smiled at social clubs. Behind closed doors, they dealt out brutal justice with a single nod. Anyone who broke the code of silence could expect a midnight ride from which they'd never return. Money poured in so fast, it seemed the rules of ordinary society no longer applied. Politicians accepted envelopes stuffed with cash. Union leaders who resisted were beaten or vanished altogether. Construction companies, docks, and nightclubs all paid a hidden tax to the mob simply to stay in business. Entire neighborhoods depended on their protection rackets, not because residents admired them, but because no one else could keep order. Fear was their greatest currency, and they spent it lavishly. Yet for all their cunning, cracks slowly appeared. Federal agents studied their movements, recorded whispered conversations, and infiltrated their crews. Informants, men once bound by blood oaths, began trading secrets for lighter sentences. Each betrayal shifted the balance. Capone, once untouchable, was finally brought down not by bullets, but by accountants who proved his tax evasion. Luciano was convicted of running a massive prostitution ring and deported to Italy, though even from exile he retained influence. Decades later, John Gotti relished his role as a media darling, stepping from limousines in designer suits, but undercover recordings captured the very words that ensured his life sentence. The fall of these titans didn't erase the culture they created. Their stories became cautionary legends, fueling books, movies, and television dramas that turned real crimes into enduring myths. Neighborhoods they once ruled still carry echoes of their reign, from old social clubs to faded murals depicting an era of both glamour and brutality. Even today, modern crime syndicates study their methods, diversified income streams, strict loyalty codes, and the manipulation of public image as lessons in underworld management. What remains most striking is how ordinary many of these men seemed in person. Neighbors described them as polite fathers who hosted backyard barbecues and slipped cash to struggling families. But when power or profit was threatened, the transformation was immediate and merciless. Smiles hardened into orders for violence, and friendships dissolved under the weight of ambition. Their dual identities, charismatic neighbor and cold-blooded enforcer, captivated the public then and continue to fascinate now. As the 20th century closed, law enforcement celebrated victories against the old guard, but the spirit of organized crime never vanished. It merely adapted, shifting into new markets and technologies, proving that while individual mobsters may fall, the lure of fast money and unchecked authority remains. The legacy of America's most ruthless mobsters is therefore not only a history of past terror, but a mirror reflecting the temptations that still shadow society today. Even after the most famous bosses were locked away or killed, the blueprint they left behind continued to shape the underworld. Younger crews stepped in to claim abandoned territories, studying the old playbook while adding their own twists. Drug trafficking became the new gold rush, replacing bootleg whiskey with cocaine and heroin. The profits were staggering, and the violence even more vicious. In New York, the 5 families fought to control every shipment that entered the city, while in Chicago, the remnants of Capone's empire restructured into modern syndicates that operated with quiet efficiency. Law enforcement, hardened by decades of experience, had grown more sophisticated too. Surveillance technology improved, allowing investigators to catch conversations once thought private. Wiretaps recorded late-night strategy sessions, and hidden microphones captured admissions that would have been unimaginable in the days of silent sit-downs. Undercover agents spent years inside mob circles, earning trust one small favor at a time until a single slip exposed entire networks. High-profile trials filled courtrooms with drama as prosecutors unveiled evidence that read like crime novels, coded ledgers, secret recordings, and testimony from turncoats who once swore never to betray their brothers. But the mob's influence wasn't only about violence and intimidation. They controlled legitimate industries that most Americans used every day without realizing it. Garbage collection contracts, shipping docks, construction projects, even high-end restaurants. Each could be a revenue stream for organized crime. A single union leader taking orders from a boss meant millions in kickbacks and endless leverage over city governments. To many ordinary workers, the mob's presence was both a threat and a strange kind of security. Wages were often higher under mob-controlled unions, but crossing the wrong person could cost a job or a life. Despite constant crackdowns, public fascination never faded. Movies like The Godfather and Goodfellas romanticized their lives, blurring the line between hero and villain. Viewers were drawn to the contradictions, men capable of generosity to their neighbors while orchestrating brutal killings, fathers who doted on their children while ordering assassinations across town. The charisma of figures like John Gotti only deepened the allure. Cameras loved him, and he loved them back, stepping into the spotlight in $1,000 suits as if he were a celebrity rather than a criminal defendant. Each acquittal fed the legend of the Teflon Don until his own words on FBI tapes finally sealed his fate. The ripple effects of these mob empires reached far beyond the cities they ruled. Their financial schemes laundered money through banks across the globe. Their alliances stretched to overseas suppliers and international smugglers. They exploited every loophole, turning legitimate businesses into fronts for gambling, loan sharking, and narcotics distribution. Even when key leaders were imprisoned, the wealth they accumulated continued to influence politics, real estate, and local economies for years. Perhaps the most enduring lesson from their reign is how organized crime thrives wherever ambition meets opportunity. Corruption, poverty, and demand for illicit goods created a perfect storm that allowed ruthless men to rise. And while the names have changed, the pattern persists in different forms today, from cybercrime networks to global drug cartels. The tactics may be updated, but the core principles of power, fear, and profit remain hauntingly familiar. Standing in the neighborhoods once patrolled by these mobsters, it's hard to imagine the terror that once ruled the streets. Cafes where deals were whispered are now trendy restaurants. Warehouses once used for smuggling are luxury apartments. Yet the stories endure, etched into the collective memory like ghostly graffiti. They remind us that behind the glamour of sharp suits and smoky nightclubs was a brutal reality. Men who built empires on blood, intimidation, and the relentless pursuit of control. Their era may have passed, but the shadow of America's ruthless mobsters still lingers in the culture and cautionary tales they left behind. Even as the mob's heyday faded, echoes of their power still shaped American life. Former enforcers and capos who survived the bloody decades often tried to blend into quieter roles, investing their hidden fortunes in restaurants, nightclubs, or construction firms. Some retired to quiet suburbs, hoping to vanish into ordinary neighborhoods, but old rivalries and debts of vengeance rarely disappeared completely. Stories circulate of once fearsome bosses meeting violent ends in unremarkable parking lots or in the living rooms of supposed friends. Loyalty in the underworld was never a lifetime guarantee. It was a commodity that could expire the moment profit or self-preservation demanded. Law enforcement, strengthened by the lessons of past battles, kept watch on these fading figures while also confronting new criminal enterprises. The RICO Act, once a bold experiment, became a powerful standard tool, allowing prosecutors to dismantle entire organizations instead of chasing one suspect at a time. Courtrooms echoed with testimonies from turncoats who described secret ceremonies, money laundering schemes, and the coded language of murder contracts. Each trial chipped away at the myth of invincibility the mob had cultivated for decades. Newspapers that once glamorized these men now chronicled their slow, public unraveling. Meanwhile, the mob's cultural legacy grew stronger than ever. Hollywood returned again and again to their stories, shaping public perception with a strange mixture of admiration and condemnation. Films, television dramas, and best-selling novels portrayed them as complex anti-heroes, calculating yet family-oriented, brutal yet oddly principled. Audiences were fascinated by the contrast between the polished surface and the ruthless core. The more society condemned organized crime, the more it seemed to celebrate it in art, a paradox the real mobsters had exploited in life. Economic shifts and technological change also transformed the criminal landscape. Where earlier generations relied on bootlegging or gambling dens, newer operations embraced credit card fraud, cybercrime, and international drug trafficking. Some descendants of old families quietly invested in these ventures, applying the same discipline and code of silence their grandfathers once enforced. The faces and methods changed, but the fundamental drivers, greed, ambition, and the promise of quick power, remained unaltered. For the neighborhoods that had lived under mob rule, the passing of the old guard was both a relief and a loss. Residents no longer feared sudden shootouts on street corners, yet many admitted that the mob's presence had once provided a strange stability. Disputes were settled quickly. Petty criminals rarely dared to operate without permission. When the syndicates collapsed, a vacuum sometimes opened for new kinds of crime. Less organized, more chaotic. It was an uncomfortable reminder that the mob's iron grip, for all its brutality, had imposed a certain order on the streets. The personal stories of those who grew up around these figures reveal another dimension. Children of mobsters often recall a childhood of contradictions. Warm family dinners, followed by whispered phone calls and sudden trips in the middle of the night. Some tried to escape the legacy entirely, changing their names and building honest lives. Others were drawn back by the lure of easy money, or by a sense of destiny they could not shake. Their memoirs and interviews provide intimate details that history books overlook: the quiet dread, the hidden wealth, the endless balancing act between affection and fear. Today, when tourists stroll through Little Italy or Chicago's old outfit haunts, they encounter a sanitized version of a violent past: museums, themed restaurants, souvenir shops selling caricatures of men who once ruled those streets. Yet beneath the playful nostalgia lies a darker truth. These were real people who used terror and murder to build their empires. Their crimes reshaped law enforcement, inspired sweeping federal legislation, and left scars on countless families. Remembering their rise and fall isn't just entertainment. It is a cautionary reminder of how easily power can corrupt, and how quickly ambition, unchecked by conscience, can turn a dream into a nightmare that echoes for generations. Even with decades of distance, the story of America's ruthless mobsters continues to reveal new layers. Historians and investigative journalists still unearth long-buried files, discovering coded ledgers, hidden bank accounts, and forgotten informant testimonies that paint an even sharper picture of how deeply these men infiltrated daily life. They were not just gangsters hiding in smoky backrooms. They were silent partners in city contracts, secret shareholders in construction companies, and shadow investors in entertainment venues. Every skyscraper project or waterfront deal in their territories carried the faint fingerprint of a mob payoff or protection fee, weaving organized crime into the economic fabric of entire regions. The political connections ran equally deep. In some cities, ward leaders and local politicians relied on mob money to finance campaigns. Deals were struck in quiet offices where handshakes mattered more than signatures. When votes were needed, crews could deliver them. When opponents threatened progress, intimidation or bribes ensured cooperation. This symbiosis meant that for years, law enforcement efforts were undermined from the inside. Prosecutors might prepare airtight cases, only to watch them collapse as evidence vanished or witnesses recanted under mysterious pressure. It wasn't simply fear that silenced people. It was a sense that the mob's reach was so extensive that resistance was futile. Meanwhile, the public's fascination only intensified. True crime magazines sold out whenever a new exposé promised inside secrets of the Mafia. Radio programs recounted daring hits, while tabloids turned violent episodes into serialized dramas. Ordinary citizens followed the exploits of famous dons as if they were athletes or movie stars, debating their strategies and speculating on their next moves. The mobsters understood this attention and sometimes courted it, dressing impeccably and maintaining a cool, commanding presence in public. They seemed untouchable, a dangerous kind of celebrity that blurred the line between criminal and cultural icon. Families of these men lived in a constant paradox. Wives and children often enjoyed luxury, expensive cars, tailored clothing, vacations far beyond the means of most Americans. Yet that comfort came with an ever-present undercurrent of dread. A father might tuck his children into bed with a gentle smile and then step outside to order a killing. Holiday gatherings could be interrupted by urgent phone calls that signaled a brewing war. Many children of mobsters have spoken of the uneasy knowledge that their comfortable lives were built on violence, a truth that haunted them even as they benefited from it. As the 20th century progressed, the relentless pressure of federal investigations and changing markets forced the mob to adapt or vanish. Some organizations shifted their focus to white-collar crimes like financial fraud and sophisticated money laundering, exploiting global banking systems to move funds across continents in seconds. Others forged alliances with international drug cartels, expanding their reach beyond national borders. Yet each adaptation carried risks, new competitors, new enemies, and new vulnerabilities that could unravel the carefully maintained code of silence. Today, remnants of those original families still exist, but they operate in a quieter, more clandestine fashion. Gone are the flamboyant public displays and headline-grabbing shootouts. Instead, their influence surfaces in subtle ways: suspicious real estate deals, complex shell companies, or sudden spikes in certain commodities that hint at hidden manipulation. Law enforcement remains vigilant, aware that organized crime rarely disappears. It simply changes form. The legacy of America's most ruthless mobsters is therefore twofold. On one hand, it is a dark cautionary tale about greed, violence, and the corruptibility of power. On the other, it is a testament to the enduring allure of rebellion and control that continues to captivate audiences. Their stories have become modern myths, retold in books, films, and documentaries that keep their names alive long after their empires crumbled. Each retelling reminds us that the line between fascination and fear is thin, and that the echoes of their reign still ripple through American culture, law, and even the economy. Their influence also lingers in subtler ways that shape modern society. The legal tools developed to fight the mob, wiretaps, witness protection programs, the RICO Act, are now standard weapons against everything from corporate fraud to international terrorism. Each innovation was born out of necessity, crafted to pierce the mob's legendary code of silence. Today, when a federal prosecutor dismantles a complex criminal network, they are using strategies first tested against the Mafia's toughest families. The mob inadvertently strengthened the very justice system it once mocked, leaving behind a framework that protects society from other threats. Culturally, the mob's shadow is everywhere. Restaurants tout family-style meals reminiscent of old mafia gatherings. Fashion designers still reference the sharp suits and polished shoes of mid-century mobsters. Musicians borrow the lingo and swagger for lyrics and videos, while television dramas revisit the same moral tension, loyalty versus ambition, love versus violence, that defined real mob life. These portrayals keep the legend alive, often romanticizing men who, in reality, were calculated killers. It's an uneasy legacy. The public fascination ensures their stories endure, but it can also blur the brutal truth behind the myth. For communities once under mob control, memory is more complicated. Older residents recall a strange mixture of fear and stability. You didn't lock your doors, some say, because nobody would dare steal without permission. Local shopkeepers might admit that protection money felt like an unofficial tax, burdensome, yet oddly reliable. The absence of that order left a vacuum, sometimes filled by disorganized crime or gang violence that proved even harder to contain. The mob's departure did not always bring peace. Instead, it revealed how deeply they had woven themselves into the civic fabric. Personal accounts from former associates add another layer to this history. Turned witnesses describe secret meetings in dimly lit backrooms, elaborate initiation rituals, and the constant pressure to prove loyalty. Some express regret, haunted by the lives they took or the families they destroyed. Others speak with a cold pragmatism, as if recounting a career in business rather than a life of crime. Their testimonies humanize the legend while underscoring the stark reality. Behind every infamous hit was a choice, often made for money or survival. Even with the decline of traditional mafia families, organized crime remains a global force. Cybercriminals now exploit digital currencies and encrypted networks, achieving the same goals, power and profit, without the need for street-level violence. In a way, these modern criminals are heirs to the mob's legacy, adopting its discipline and secrecy while embracing new technology. The playing field has changed, but the game of power remains strikingly familiar. Walking today through neighborhoods once synonymous with notorious families, you might see trendy cafes, art galleries, and boutique hotels. Tour guides point out former social clubs or restaurants where bosses once plotted their next move, their voices mixing awe with caution. Plaques and murals may commemorate victims of mob violence, reminding visitors that beneath the glossy nostalgia lies a history written in blood. These sites stand as quiet witnesses to a time when a handful of men controlled billions in illicit revenue and decided who lived or died with a single word. The enduring fascination with America's ruthless mobsters ultimately reflects something about human nature. We are drawn to stories of audacious rule breakers who defy the system, even as we recoil from their brutality. Their lives were cautionary epics of ambition unbound by conscience, and their downfall proves that no empire of fear lasts forever. From the back alleys of prohibition to the courtrooms where they finally fell, their saga warns us that unchecked power, no matter how cunning or charismatic, inevitably collapses, leaving only echoes of a violent reign that once gripped a nation. Even with their empires long dismantled, the mobsters' stories remain a living presence in American consciousness. Retired detectives still give lectures to law students and criminologists about the complex investigations that toppled once untouchable families. Those first-hand accounts reveal how methodical patience, years of surveillance, slow infiltration, and careful financial tracing proved more lethal than any gunfight. They show how justice can prevail, but only when society commits to the long, unglamorous work of persistence. Writers and filmmakers continue to mine these histories for inspiration, exploring the moral gray zones where loyalty, ambition, and betrayal collide. New documentaries surface old surveillance footage and long-sealed FBI files, giving modern audiences an intimate look at the men behind the myths. Podcasts dissect infamous hits frame by frame, analyzing everything from getaway routes to courtroom transcripts. The fascination is enduring because these tales are more than crime stories. They're studies in power, human weakness, and the costs of unchecked desire. For the families of victims, however, there is no romance in these memories. Many still live with unanswered questions or the pain of a relative's disappearance. Some recall the chilling silence that followed a loved one's murder. No witnesses, no justice, only whispers about who gave the order. Memorials and small plaques sometimes mark the spots where lives were taken, understated reminders that beneath every legend lies real human tragedy. Economically, the influence lingers as well. Certain real estate holdings and hidden trust funds, seeded decades ago with mob money, still generate profits today, quiet inheritances from a violent past. Investigators occasionally uncover these financial ghosts when tracing suspicious transactions or unraveling old shell companies. Each discovery underscores how deeply the mob once embedded itself into legitimate markets and how difficult it can be to untangle that legacy. Yet the most striking impact may be psychological. The archetype of the mobster, the charismatic outlaw who commands respect through fear, has seeped into everyday language and culture. We speak of making an offer they can't refuse, or being part of someone's family, expressions born in the underworld but now common in offices and popular entertainment. This casual borrowing shows how the mob's image still captivates, even when the reality was anything but glamorous. Modern organized crime has evolved far beyond the smoky backrooms of mid-century America. Digital networks now enable criminals to move money and contraband across continents with a few keystrokes. But the strategies, secrecy, hierarchy, calculated intimidation, mirror those perfected by the old mafia families. The lessons of that past, both for criminals and for those who fight them, remain relevant in an age of cyber heists and global cartels. When people visit former mob strongholds today, Chicago's old outfit neighborhoods, New York's Little Italy, or quiet New Jersey suburbs, they often find chic cafes, condos, and boutiques where once there were guarded social clubs. A casual passerby might never guess the violent decisions once made behind those brick walls. Yet locals sometimes share hushed stories of late-night gunfire or sudden disappearances, memories that linger like an invisible watermark on the landscape. Ultimately, the saga of America's ruthless mobsters endures because it speaks to universal themes: ambition without restraint, the seductive pull of power, and the inevitable collapse of fear-based empires. Their rise and fall remind us that every society must remain vigilant against corruption, and that no matter how invincible a criminal empire may appear, time and justice have a way of catching up. The mobsters themselves are gone, but the cautionary lessons of their reign continue to echo, warning future generations that the pursuit of power without conscience always carries a price.